I'm Nora Lopez. I'm Executive Editor at the San Antonio Express News, and this is En Vivo, a new series of live events where we invite readers and subscribers to join us as we interview newsmakers, and sometimes we go behind the scenes with our beat journalists to provide insight into what we do. And one of the neat things about this forum is that you get to be reporters today. You can also ask questions. If you have one, please feel free to go ahead and submit it via Q&A on Zoom. I'm very excited about our panel today with these two journalists whom I greatly admire, and I'm lucky to call my friends. We've known each other for a number of years as members of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Welcome, John.
Hey, welcome. Hi, how are you? Good, Nora. Thank you for having us on.
Welcome, Maria Elena.
Nice to see you, Nora. Nice to see you, John. And welcome to everyone who's joining us.
So let me tell you just a little bit about John and Maria Elena, who really do not need much of an introduction. Maria Elena Salinas is a broadcast journalist, a news anchor, and author who joined ABC News as a contributor and consultant in 2022. She has been described as the voice of Hispanic America by the New York Times, and she is undoubtedly one of the most recognized and influential journalists in the U.S. For nearly 4 decades, she served as the co-anchor of the evening newscast on the Spanish language network Univision, and her work has earned her top awards in broadcasting. Maria Elena is a founding member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and for over 2 decades, she has provided dozens of students with a scholarship under her name. We also call her La Madrina at NHJ. John is the creator and host of What Would You Do?, one of the highest rated news magazine franchises in recent years. During his 40-year tenure as an ABC News correspondent, he has reported extensively across all of their programs and platforms and has served as an anchor for 2020 Downtown and Primetime Live. Among his hundreds of awards, yes, I said hundreds, he has been honored with 7 national Emmys, the first of which he received for swimming across the Rio Grande undercover for a story of undocumented migrants. He is one of San Antonio's favorite sons, born and raised right here, a local homeboy. Yeah. Recently, both John and Maria Elena have been on the front lines of ABC News' Uvalde 365 series. They've been reporting from Uvalde in the aftermath of the shooting at Robb Elementary, and they've also written a book about their experience there, 1 Year in Uvalde, a story of hope and resilience. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge a theme that emerged throughout your book. The families of the students and teachers killed in Uvalde kept asking all journalists to say their names, to remember the victims. So let's begin with that today. Those who were killed: Navea Alisa Bravo, Jacqueline Jalen Casares, McKenna Lee Elrod Seiler, Jose Manuel Flores Jr., Eliana Amaya Garcia, Jose Antonio Garcia, Irma Linda Garcia, Uzi Sergio Garcia, Amory Joe Garza, Xavier James Lopez, JC Carmelo Luevanos, Tess Marie Mata, Miranda Gail Mathis, Eva Mireles, Alithia Haven Ramirez, Annabel Guadalupe Rodriguez, Maite Juliana Rodriguez, Alexandria Anaya Lexi Rubio, Leila Marie Salazar, Jayla Nicole Silguero, Eliana Torres, and Rogelio Fernandez Torres. John and Maria Elena, so the usual formula for these types of events, these types of tragedies, is for the big network TV news reports to come in. They report on these, what's happening on the ground for a short while, and they might stay a week, maybe 2, but then they move on to the next big thing, maybe returning in a year or 2 for anniversary type pieces. What was it about this particular event that warranted the type of news coverage that ABC News gave it? And can you tell us a little bit about the whole thought process and how all of this came to be?
Mm-hmm.
You want to start, John? Or?
Yeah. I think, of course, it was the magnitude of the story. And hello, everyone. It's good to be back with my audience in San Antonio. First of all, it was the magnitude of the story, the heartache, of course, and the senselessness of such a huge tragedy. But also, it became very clear pretty early on that at least some of those 21 victims could have been saved if those 376 police officers had acted sooner, if they had taken down the shooter. So there was a real crisis of command, as we called it, at Robb Elementary that needed to be investigated. And you can't do that in a couple of weeks of descending upon a town the way we always do as the media and then leave to the next mass shooting, because God knows there's going to be another one. But here, there were so many questions, and it would take a long time to get the answers. We had to hold the authorities' feet to the fire and keep asking. And then, of course, it was the families and the survivors who quickly became activists and advocates on so many fronts that we needed to cover. And I think Maria Elena can tell you how the decision to send us down there happened.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the first idea came from Cindy Galley, who is the head of the Uvalde 365 team and also heads the investigative unit at ABC. And, she suggested it to our boss at the time, the president of ABC News, Kim Godwin. I'm not sure if she thought that they were going to say yes, because that doesn't happen, Nora, just like you described. It's very common for the media to be there week, 2 weeks, and then it gets knocked off the headlines and everyone goes on to the next story. It's also a huge commitment, a huge financial commitment, and a huge commitment from the teams. You have to pull people from different things and commit them to a whole year. But, the idea was like, what if we stay there for a year? That way we're able to document how a city like Uvalde evolves or doesn't evolve, how they attempt to heal and how they attempt to fight for accountability. So there were just so many different things. What John mentioned, of course, is the investigative part of it, trying to make some sense out of something that's so senseless. Just try to get the whys and try to get some answers for the families. And also this was a small community, a tight-knit community, and they were mostly, Mexican-American, with more than 90% are Mexican-American. I mean, some of you from San Antonio, you might know more about Uvalde than I do, who I'm from California, but I am Mexican-American, and so is John. I'm from California, and Kim Godwin believed that we would be well suited to cover this and to be the face of the coverage here for two reasons. One, we knew the community. We could understand the culture there. And she believed that they would trust us. John, having been at ABC for 4 decades, and myself, before joining ABC, I was with Univision for 37 years. So up to a certain point, we might have been familiar to at least some of the people there. And we didn't want to be the type of media that got there, stuck a microphone and a camera in people's faces and sort of like pushed them to give us a soundbite. We wanted to establish relationships, and they selected a team of amazing producers and associate producers and camera crews that were really, really invested in this story. And, I think at the end, we were all happy with the end result. We were able to establish relationships with the people from Uvalde. We were able to see things that we would not have been able to see or detect if we had not been embedded there. Many of our producers spent holidays there, Christmas and Thanksgiving, and with the families. And that's how you get to know the families, the community, and look at this evolving story and be able to really document it in the way that it deserves.
Yes, so you had some 70 plus folks there. Is that correct? There were more than 70 producers,
At different times.
Yeah, at times. But the unit that stayed there was more like 12 to 15 people. We opened up an office right downtown at 202 Hornby Place that became our home. We spent a lot of nights at the Hampton Inn and at the Holiday Inn. And Maria Elena had other assignments to go to frequently, so we would go in and out. But I tell you, the producers and the camera people, they lived there. And it allowed us, as Maria Elena said, to gain the people's trust. You know, too often the media can be awfully intimidating. When a big story breaks like this, they trample on front lawns, they are knocking on doors, tapping on windows, shooting, and because it's so competitive. Well, in this case, we were able to not only to gain their trust, as she said. So they started soon, after a few weeks, a few months, not only opening up their doors, but opening up their hearts to Maria Elena and me particularly. But we also had Mireya Villarreal, who's the other correspondent who was down there doing a lot of work. So it became quite a team effort. And we got to know the folks. We got to drink a beer with them. We got to barbecue with them. We went to church with them. We sang songs after a while. And we saw them, you know, they began to see us as fellow human beings. And it was very personal for me. You know, I grew up, I was born an hour away in San Antonio. The victims looked like my relatives, you know, the two teachers. One of them is named Irma, looked like my two sisters, Irma, my sister. So it was very personal. As soon as I heard that this had happened, I could not wait to get there because I thought I could lend a certain expertise. And who better to join me on this effort than Maria Elena?
John, and from the book, I also gleaned that your son, Nico, who's also a filmmaker, joined you on the project. How was that experience in covering this particular story with so much emotion about children?
I know. He happened to be visiting us in Dallas, and I said, "You want to go with me?" the first day, and a few days after it happened, and we drove down, and then suddenly a story broke in Uvalde that we had development in that story that we had to cover. So he started making sure he was able to get me on the air because we didn't have someone who could get me on the air with ABC Live that evening. And ABC liked what he did, and they asked if he would stay for them. He was there a lot longer than I was. It was just very special. You know, I think it brought us together because there were moments when we would be interviewing a grieving family, and he would be filming me, and I would be interviewing, another camera would be filming the subject of our interview. And I would look up, and I tell you, we were both teary-eyed. It was very emotional. He had never seen anything like this. I had all my life, I've covered, you know, tragedies and wars in Central America, but not Nico. So I think it brought us together, and I was really proud that he was able to learn something from this. And the families loved him, which was the other special thing. They opened up to him too.
Real quickly, I want to come back to how you settled into the community. You rented an office. I think you also rented a loft. And I loved what you wrote about how the local team tried to really become a part of the community. And one of the things you did was you went all out and decorating the office space. Can you tell us how you decorated it?
It was mainly and Ish.
Maria?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Ish was one of the ones that decorated. They were constantly buying things and putting up the pictures and putting up, making sure that we had spaces there for us to feel, for the staff to feel comfortable, but also to have any one of the families or community members to come and visit us. They set up an area that we could do interviews in. They set up several desks. You know, we had, I guess you can call it a little kitchen. It was just really a microwave oven and a tiny little cooler. But, you know, we just wanted to make it feel home. We wanted to make it feel like it was part of our office, but also our home. Nothing fancy really, but we did have a lot of pictures and a lot of pictures that we would take during the coverage. John, I don't know if you remember anything else about that.
No, there were prints of Uvalde from throughout. I have one still that is the water tower of Uvalde, and we became very close to the football team. the coyotes. I thought they were called coyotes, but it's the coyotes quickly learned in Uvalde. Just again, it was an opportunity to tell folks, look, you may not want to talk to us right now when we're here under deadline, but we're going to be here a long time. So you can come by the office tomorrow and next week and next month. There was no rush to get the quick soundbite. So we wanted folks to feel at home and to know that they could knock on our doors. And plus, they would see us at the H-E-B and at the Mexican restaurant. We all gained a lot of weight because we were eating such great food.
Yeah. And also the location, I think, was really important, and it really kept us grounded and for us to understand, why we were there. We were right around the corner from that little plaza, the little park.
Yeah.
We have all of the crosses that we saw since the beginning of the coverage. And right across the street is where the murals began. So all we needed to do was walk right outside the door of the office, and there we begin to see the murals. So it was a constant reminder of, why we were there, what our mission was. And I think up to a certain point, that mission became our passion because, everyone got very involved. There's this unwritten rule that you're not supposed to get emotionally involved as a journalist in any kind of story, but sometimes it's difficult not to. And in the case of Uvalde, I believe that the team did get emotionally involved. It didn't get in the way of our reporting as objective journalists. But I do have to say that it was not just a group of great journalists, but the humanity in which these relationships were handled and, how they were developed is definitely something very special.
Maria Elena has a great story about how some folks did not want to talk to the media. And she went to one house where there was a sign that says, no media, no interviews, don't come in. So tell them what happened, Maria Elena.
Well, I had gone the day before and they had kicked us out and said, no media. And we left, fast. And the producer that I was working with left his backpack there. So we had to call the family again the following day and say, we're so sorry, but, we have to come back because we left our backpack. They said, okay, come pick up your backpack. So we get there, we knock on the door, they give us a backpack, and then they say, come in, pasa adelante. And I said, well, it says no media here. They said, no, you can come in. I said, can? We were like a little surprised, and I walked in, and like in any multi-generational family, you had all the primas and the tias sitting around the table. And one of the primas tells me, she wants to talk to you, pointing to the grandmother of one of the victims, in Espanol. And I asked her, and I said, you do? You want to talk to me? She says, yes, I used to watch you on Univision. Remember, I was on Univision 37 years. So, thankfully, she trusted me. She knew my work and she trusted me, and she allowed me to do this. And this was like in the first couple of days of the tragedy. And, I think that in a way, ABC was kind of impressed with that because nobody wanted to talk. And they said, well, how did you get in there? I said, I don't know. I guess, Univision helped this time around, or my Espanol helped this time around. But, it was very nice because the grandmother with tears and in Spanish just told me how special her granddaughter was and how much they were suffering. But more than anything else, she wanted to tell me about her granddaughter and how she was so much fun and how she used to do TikTok videos, and she would show them to me with her dancing. So that was something very special. And, we respected their decision to not attempt to come in, but, we also were very happy that they did allow us in.
Again, the value and the importance of having reporters who understand the language and who are compassionate and who people recognize for that compassion, so that they may be a little more open to the idea of talking to us.
That's something that I found very useful when I was a police reporter. That even though the majority of the folks who live in Uvalde spoke English, Spanish is still, a language that's spoken at home. And I always found that when I could communicate a little bit in Spanish with them, it put them at ease. It made them feel like you were more relatable to them. How did you prepare, or what were some of the challenges that you faced in preparing to interview these families, which is a much different process I think, to interview grieving families as it is to, interview polished politicians.
Yeah,
How
you take a few deep breaths. You know it's going to be sad on the way down there, and it's going to be painful. But what I do is I keep in mind the greater good that's going to come out from suffering from that little, pain and the sadness when you're interviewing someone like this. You know that by exposing what happened there, by shining a light on what happened, then maybe, just maybe, some good will come out of it, and their stories will be heard. And the issue over guns and the availability to 18-year-olds, these AR-15 style weapons, might get some publicity, and that kind of thing is what I try to keep in mind. It's always painful, nothing compared to the pain that these families have gone through, of course. But there are many times when you're sitting there and you're in tears yourself. We don't show that part of it on camera, but it's important to go in with just an open mind. And really, the best thing we can do is just listen, right, Maria Elena?
Yeah, and I think both John and I, after so many decades of covering news, I'm sure that we've done very hard-hitting stories, but we've done a lot of human interest stories. And, you learn throughout the way how to be able to talk to people in pain. So this was not our first rodeo. Sorry for the cliche, but this was not the first time that we have had to do these types of interviews. Many times, we're seeing trying to hold back tears interviewing someone that is suffering. We also had, I don't remember the name of the center, but we did have a session with Columbia University. They have a special center that sort of like gives you a play-by-play on how to deal with trauma victims and how to talk to them and how to talk to children, how, what to say, what not to say, how to avoid any triggers. You don't want to trigger anyone to have to be re-victimized. But I think more than anything else, it's like, the experience of having done this before, tragically. I mean, it's sad to say, but this is not the first time that we have to interview people that have lost loved ones. And, when you become used to that, you shouldn't become used to it, really. It makes it easier as a journalist, but we don't want to normalize this kind of suffering. But you also have to remember they have to treat people with respect, because their peace, their sanity, their mourning, their pain is so much more important than any soundbite that you want to get, or any special story that you want to break. You don't want to get the scoop. You want to respect them. And that's what we were there for. I mean, that's why the whole thing came about, because we wanted to document it, yes, as journalists, but we also wanted to give them that opportunity, not be their voice, but give them a platform for them to express their voice, whatever it is that they wanted to say. So those are things you have to keep in mind. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I like to point out that some of the younger staff members that were there for ABC, and I'm sure the other networks had this too, but I know that we did, offered therapy, right, and counseling to some of, Maria Elena and I might have covered wars and death and destruction, but some of the younger producers and camera folks and associate producers had not. So ABC made sure that they were also receiving help and counseling after being there for so long, to make sure that they were okay.
Thank you. I want to remind our viewers that if you have a question, please feel free to put it on the Q&A, and we will get to those in a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual police response. We all know about the 77 minutes that the students and teachers waited for police to come and help them. As you called it in your book, it's a national case study in what not to do when responding to a mass shooting. Pete Arredondo is caught on camera footage saying, people are going to ask why we're taking so long. We're trying to preserve the rest of the lives. What are your thoughts, John, when you hear those words, especially now that you've gotten to know the families?
Well, we should mention that Pete Arredondo just was indicted, right, along with another police officer. The first one's really on 10 state felony counts. He and an officer by the name of Adrian Gonzalez, and the charges are abandoning and endangering children. He turned himself into custody, Arredondo, and then he quickly bonded out. So he has yet to face trial. He's pled not guilty, and so has the other officer, Gonzalez. Look, I mean, I guess the best example I can have is the Cáceres family, who lost little Jackie Cáceres, who was among the victims, who later found out that had the police acted sooner, an autopsy showed that Jackie died later. She wasn't killed in the initial round of fire. She passed away more than a half an hour after the shooting started. And their parents, the Cáceres family, Gloria and Javier, are heartbroken because knowing that had police moved in, she might have been, taken to the hospital and survived. It is so heartbreaking. They all believed, Arredondo, they believed that he was in charge. He later denied that he was in charge, but no one did anything. Or people did, the cops, the law enforcement, and there was many agencies there, did very little to get in and try to take him down because they considered himself, the shooter, a barricaded officer, a barricaded shooter. And he wasn't. When it's barricaded, that means he's not doing any more damage. Well, in this case, the shooter was. So it's just really, really frustrating. One of my favorite interviews, memorable, I should say, was with Amy Marin, the school staffer who worked at Robb Elementary and was falsely accused on national television by the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety of having left a door open at the back of the school. These were all the missteps that happened early on. This is among them, right? They accused her of leaving the door open, Amy Marin, and then allowing the shooter, that's the door through which the shooter entered the building. Well, as you can imagine, she was a pariah in the town of Uvalde, everybody blaming her for having done this. Later, it turns out that she closed the door behind her. It didn't lock, but she kicked out the door that was holding the rock that was holding the door open and closed it as far as she knew.
And it's on video, right?
Yeah, it's on video. And I did that story. And to me, that's one of the most, of course, every single interview that I did with parents was memorable. But this one was particularly so because she now, when I interviewed her, suffered from depression, from anxiety, from insomnia, from PTSD. Even though they went on and corrected that false report, she still went to the grocery store at HEB there. It's a small community, and everyone saw her and pointed to her saying, she's the one that let him in. Amy Marin now stutters when she talks. She shakes. She loses her balance. This was once a woman who loved working with children, and the damage done to her too just was horrific. She can't work with kids anymore.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be there and to continue this type of coverage, because it's not just the shooting and the police response, which was horrible, but also the families and how they're affected and the survivors. In the book there's a play-by-play of what happened in those 77 minutes, from where the shooter arrived and they finally breached the room and killed him. But, like John said, it's so obvious that there were so many missed opportunities. You can call them mistakes, misjudgments, incompetence, or as some have called it, cowardice. But there were over 370 agents from 23 different agencies. I mean, when I see those numbers and they stuck in my head because it's just unbelievable that there could be so many people there and that no one did anything. So like you said, Nora, this is an example of what not to do. And now when we see any kind of mass shooting, whether it's a school shooting or any other kind of mass shooting, the first thing that happens in a press conference is that the chief of police or the public information officer, the first thing they say is, our officers were there within 2 minutes or within 3 minutes or within 5 minutes, because no one wants to repeat what happened in Uvalde. And, that's part of the accountability is, of course, seeing people indicted, but there's only 2 now, but there were over 300. So is it just those 2, or are there many more that bear the responsibility of what happened that day?
The other disturbing thing about this incident, I think, is that there is so much footage, so much was actually captured, by the police and their body cameras. And you mentioned in your book that only a select few members of the families, the victims' families, actually wanted to watch the footage from inside the classroom. Can you share a little bit more about why, what were the reasons that they gave you?
Well, some of them also would feel good about going to the school and driving by the school. And let me see, I think it was sometime last year, I think it was before the 2nd anniversary, they allowed the families to go in and tour the school. And some of them went, because a lot of the ones that went said they wanted to see where their kids took their last breath. For others, it might be too painful, but for them, the soul of their child is, was still there. And they wanted to live everything that they could, every little second, relive what they lived and see the place that saw them at one moment and for so many years happy. That morning, a lot of them got awards. They stayed because they wanted to see movies. So that day was a happy day for them. And it ended up in so much tragedy. But that's still part of the life of their children. So they wanted to be able to do this. They wanted to see the footage. They wanted to go to the school. They wanted to tour the classes. And they did. But there's others that just couldn't. I don't know if you talked to anybody, John, that did not want to do that.
It was just so viciously gruesome that no one, even our staff at ABC, I still have not seen the video that police took when they first broke in. You can imagine. A couple of the kids actually smeared blood on their own bodies, pretending to be dead, playing dead. So no, I think this would be too traumatic for families to actually see the footage.
I think we're about ready to wrap up here and open it up to some more questions, but I'd like to end with what you named the book, A Story of Hope and Resilience, 1 year in Uvalde. Can you talk about the resilience of Uvalde and the hope there?
They're amazing.
Yeah, they are. They're really, really, really strong. One of the things that I realized is that such a tight-knit community, that in the beginning was so united, then became fractured. Life completely changed for those who lost loved ones and those, who lived through it closely, but many of the community just wanted to move on. But I'm impressed on how many families who lost loved ones have become advocates, something they had never done before. And suddenly their pain brought out their voice. They traveled to Austin, to the Capitol, or wherever they find a forum to voice their grievance. And just a couple weeks ago, we saw Kim Rubio at the Democratic National Convention, Lexi's mom, talking about the pain that she felt there. So, this did bring out something in them, and that was the willingness to fight for the memory of their children and to fight for accountability.
Yeah, there were marches and protests in Austin. We followed them there. They went to Washington, D.C. and met at the White House. Kim Rubio ran for mayor of Uvalde. Mr. Cáceres also ran for public office. They didn't win, but they became very, very involved, and it sort of like rose from the ashes of what happened at Robb Elementary.
Let me take a couple of audience questions. Someone wondered if either of you ever had a chance to speak with Pete Arredondo. I know he did one big interview, I think, with CNN, but did you ever have the opportunity to speak with him?
No, we wanted to. We put in requests, and the answer was no. He wouldn't talk to me. He did talk to Ed Lavandera from CNN a couple of weeks ago. You didn't get to meet him either, right, Maria Elena?
No, I didn't.
Someone else asked if you ever spoke with the clerk who sold the shooter the rifles or anyone at the gun shop. They wonder if they saw anything that they would now think of as suspicious behavior.
I mean, I don't think that we did. And we tried not to focus too much on the shooter or their families. I mean, both John and I suggested and tried to interview family members, a grandmother who was also a victim who was shot by the shooter that morning, and the mother. But I think, we really didn't want to focus on the perpetrator and their families. ABC didn't want to do that. And we understood that that was not the way we wanted to go. So we didn't attempt to do that. And the one thing is that, whoever sold him the gun, because he had already ordered the gun online, he just picked it up at this place. It's legal to do that. And that's one of the things that the families want to change. They're asking to raise the age to buy a semi-automatic weapon to 21 from 18. I mean, you can't drink a beer, but you can buy a semi-automatic weapon at 18 years old. And that's one of the things that they want to change. And this person had already ordered it online before he turned 18. And the day that he turned 18, he got an email or a text message or a message from the gun developer saying, "You're 18 today. It's time to come pick up your gun." And he went to pick up his gun. So, I mean, the families did see things that were suspicious, but I don't know that they imagined that he was capable of doing something like that.
And how many times do you hear that? And we never thought he was capable of doing that, or not in this town. And yet it happens too many times.
In the book, you speak at length about the demographics of Uvalde, and you also talk a little bit about the history of the school system there and how Robb Elementary was basically the Hispanic or the Latino school. A couple of our audience members are kind of asking about that. One of them, Alberto Moreno, asked, can you perhaps touch on maybe if the victim's ethnicity played a role? Do you think it mattered that the police response? John, do you think
I personally don't think that it played a role in the shooting. The perpetrator was also Hispanic. Mm-hmm. But, Uvalde is it 95%, John, or 93%, something like that, Hispanic. Yeah. But, it's still very segregated. And that was known as the Mexican school. That's where Mexicans would go. And we started digging into the history of Robb Elementary. We found out that way back in the 70s, it was mostly Latino kids that were into school there. There was one teacher there who spoke Spanish. And, he was sort of like the liaison between the families who spoke Spanish and the school administration. And he was let go. And there was protest, and the students from the high school decided to walk out. And this is during the 70s, where the Chicano rights movements was going on, the civil rights movement, but also the Chicano movement was happening all over the country, where there were Mexican American communities. I know that we lived through that in California, and they risked that for him because a lot of them weren't able to graduate, and a lot of them were rejected by the community. They lost friends. They were even, their parents were mad at them for doing that. But one thing that taught us is that when this community feels that they have been insulted or that they have been disrespected, they will fight. They will do something. And that's the same thing that these families are doing now. What did you take away from that, John?
The same thing. It remains pretty divided, even though the white community they were compassionate early on. But after a while, folks who didn't lose children kept saying, time to move on. Let's get over it. You're giving Uvalde, and all the media here is giving Uvalde a bad name. I remember I was doing a stand-up for Good Morning America, a live shot one morning in the darkness there. and a car came by, stopped, and these people started yelling at me, get out of our town. They were fed up with us. When the predominantly Hispanic community, the parents of the children, were calling for the resignation of the superintendent there at Uvalde, many of his white supporters came out and protesting on his behalf, saying, "We love you. We don't want to see you gone." So it was touchy and remains rather divided. I didn't see a lot of rich landowners or farmers who own a lot of the property there at these protests, at least not after the first week or two.
A variation of a couple of questions from our audience members who basically want to know what can we do? How can we help Uvalde now? Chloe Galvan, in particular, with the Children's Bereavement Center of South Texas, she's asking, based on your work with the families, are there any areas of opportunity to support families that they should look into?
When we did see just an outpouring of support from all over the country, particularly from Texas, but from all over the country.
All over the world.
Yeah. And we did a lot of our interviews at the library. The library is sort of like the hub of Uvalde, where everyone goes. And they were just inundated with people just walking in, either calling or sending stuff, or just walking in and saying, what can we do and how can we help? And they did have therapists from all over come and help the community, not just the parents, but kids. Remember, that school was full that day. And all those kids are survivors because they heard, some of them, about at least 10 or 12 of them that survived, that were inside that room, including those two little girls who made those 911 calls. They have to have this trauma, with them in their mind for the rest of their lives. But there were others there too. So all those students are survivors. All those teachers are survivors. And they will definitely need that help. And they have to go out of Uvalde because there's not enough in Uvalde. The therapist would either come into Uvalde and offer some classes or some sessions for the children or for whoever wanted it. But eventually that does run out. I mean, there was a lot of donations also, a lot of GoFundMe accounts that were established. But, money doesn't replace your loved one. And they're still fighting to see how that money is going to be distributed. So, it's difficult. I would think that if you ask the parents, how can we help? They would say, remember their names. Don't forget the story. Don't let this happen again. And fight for gun control. This is what I think the families want.
And push your schools to have adequate locking systems and doors that can be left unlocked, for example. Learn from what the police did wrong in this community so that it doesn't happen again. I think that's what they would want also. On social media, if all these families, most of them are on social media, if you can express your support, because they got a measure of hate mail too, let them know that you're thinking about them.
What is the relationship now between the community and the police department? One of our viewers wonders what that relationship is like today. Is there still that feeling of negativity towards the police department? I
think there's a feeling that you let us down. And they still see them at the HEB. Remember, they all go shopping and they go to the same little restaurants there. They see each other a lot. The community will never get over this. They'll try to get through it. Some of the survivors have wanted to leave Uvalde, but they can't because their children are buried there and they would feel like they're abandoning them.
Yeah, but I mean, there was a lot of them that were fired, and they have been, some of them haven't been replaced, but they've had different leadership that has also resigned. There was a new mayor, the mayor resigned. There was a new police chief, the police chief resigned. So I think it's hard to establish that trust that is so needed, because why are the police there? They're to protect the community. And, when they really needed to be protected, they didn't show up for them. So there's going to be probably a mistrust of law enforcement, more in Uvalde than in other places.
Yeah.
Two more questions real quickly. Do you all know what do either of you happen to know what happened to the one mother, Rose Angeli Gomez, who did violate police rules and went in to rescue her children? Do you all know what the status of that? Was she cleared of wrongdoing?
I don't remember that.
I don't remember us reporting either the status of that. So that's a good question. We will follow up on it in our reporting. And then going back to the issue of objective and fair reporting, this is from one of our attendees. Can you talk just a little bit more about balancing between becoming too close to the folks in the community you're reporting on and remaining fair in your reporting? Did you face any difficulties, and how did you discuss among your team how to handle that?
From my point of view, as I said before, there is that unwritten rule for journalists that you're not supposed to get involved in the story. But, I have a lot of faith in the team that we had there. And and there are some that did get emotionally involved, that became friends with the family. But, we have a very solid team, who are very professional journalists. And I don't know that we had to tell each other, hey, don't go overboard. I think we knew what we had to do. You just put that pain aside when you do the work that you have to do. If there's one thing that did happen, is that maybe we had a little bit more compassion toward it. But, we're covering victims, people who lost their loved ones, who lost their children. I mean, just imagine they lost their brother and sister, that lost their nieces, because, they're extended families. And it's not just the blood relatives in a community like that. Your neighbors and the people you go to church with and the people you go to school with, they kind of become part of your family. So you do have to treat that with a lot of compassion, and then with a lot of force, cover the investigation. But I didn't see any instance or feel any instance in which we thought, hey, wait a minute, we shouldn't do a story like this because we're getting, putting ourselves too much into it. I think we knew what we were supposed to do.
And again, with time, given the fact we weren't going live every minute, we had the luxury of time to be able to look at these scripts and run it past our editors and run it past our lawyers in New York. Everything we do is gone over with a fine-tooth comb. So because we were able to spend a year in Uvalde, we weren't always rushing and throwing things on the air that might have seemed biased. We had the luxury of time to consider that. And by the way, anytime we did something and someone made an accusation against the authorities there, whether they be the police or the politicians, we gave those politicians and those police officers and the state police and the FBI and the Border Patrol the opportunity to talk to us. And maybe if they felt they were being slighted, well, then tell us what your side of the story is. So we gave that opportunity. That's what reporters do.
Thank you, John. Maria Elena. Is there any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave us with before we sign off here, John? Any last few words about your experience there?
I miss Uvalde, and I want to go back, and I will be going back. We're not going to forget it. It was Uvalde 365 was the name of the project, because we spent 365 days there. But I miss the people and the simplicity of life there. Our lives are really crazy. We're traveling all the time on airplanes all the time, filming what would you do, and 2020, always in a hurry, meeting deadlines. Uvalde allowed us, and I treasure that, allowed us to stop for a moment and breathe and really get to know these families without the lights and without the cameras often, without having to document every single moment. And that was the beauty and the luxury of giving this much time. I would also suggest that people see our documentary that we did, right? Maria Elena, it's, I know, printed black, and it's about the tiny little newspaper the Uvalde Leader News, that struggled to tell the story of this tragedy in their hometown.
And they struggled because one of theirs was affected. Kim Rubio is a journalist, and Kim Rubio, in another instance, might have been reporting on that story, but it was her that lost her daughter. For me, I mean, there's so many takeaways. I just feel privileged that I was able to cover that story and work with the team that I did. I think I had only started at ABC a month before this happened, to get to work with John, who I've known for decades, but now to actually be able to work together was a true honor. And just the entire team. Like I said, I think that we will have a bond forever, because the team, the Uvalde 365 team, just became so close. And also, I think the lessons that the families taught us. They taught us, compassion. They taught us strength, because this was not just the story of the aftermath of a school shooting. It was a story of hope and a story of resilience. And I've learned so much from them, and I admire them so much. And I just hope that the community comes together and at some point understands and has a little bit more empathy for what they are feeling, and that division that exists right now will end. And also for people to see that when this does happen in your community, because we never know, it could happen in your community anytime. Uvalde would have never imagined that this would have happened there. Just remember some of the lessons from Uvalde.
Yeah, leave us with the thought of the sisterhood of women, the moms you interviewed, who you were a little afraid, you were intimidated to talk to them.
Oh, yes. I know that we're running out of time, but I did want to say that because I did interview, that was one of my favorite interviews too, which is the 4 mothers that lost their loved ones. And, because it was kind of hard for us to be able to get, these interviews sometimes, just the privilege of being able to sit down with 4 of them, which Ish Estrada had become he's one of our producers. He was also a camera person, but he was a producer. And, he was able to convince Veronica Mata, Tessa's mom, Ana Rodriguez, Maite's mom, Kim Rubio, Lexi's mom, and Gloria Cáceres, who was Jackie's mom, to sit down and talk to us. And yes, you're right, John. I was scared. I was intimidated. And, I've had an opportunity to interview heads of state, presidents, guerrilla leaders, but I was nervous because I wanted to make sure that I didn't say anything that would trigger their pain. And Ish warned me about that. Be careful. Don't talk about this and don't talk about that. But, when we were able to sit down and have that conversation, I kind of said, why are you guys so close? Is this some kind of a sisterhood? And they told me it's because we now belong to a club that no one wants to belong to, which is parents or mothers of children who have been killed in school shootings. And they said that they are able to talk to each other about anything, more so than even their own family members. And then we went on to see the all of the murals. And again, I was afraid. I said, oh my God, it's going to trigger them. I'm not supposed to trigger them. We're going to see the murals. When they see their child, they're going to cry and it's going to be pain. And it was not. It was beautiful. As soon as we got to each one of the murals, they talked about their daughters and look at how beautiful she looks. And the murals tell the story of that child or the teachers, what they liked, what they dreamed, their most prized possessions. And they talked about that, and look at the butterfly and look at that little rock with the Eiffel Tower on it. And she would have loved being there. They liked it so much that now they go back together or alone every once in a while and go to the murals and just stare at them and talk to their children. So what we thought was going to be very difficult ended up being something very special.
Yeah. I invite everyone to go. And when you get a chance, go to Uvalde, look at the murals, walk around, and express your support for that community. It's a lovely community.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Maria Elena. And thank you to our readers and subscribers who joined us here today for this very heartwarming discussion about the aftermath. I'm heartened to hear that the community is moving on, because this is such a tragedy, but we can, as they keep reminding us, don't forget.
Thank you for inviting us.
And thank you to the San Antonio Express News.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.